talk about this morning, and it's the most difficult lecture that I give, because the goal is not to convey a feeling or an impression, but to actually convey an idea. And ideas you either get or don't get. It isn't like you can halfway get how to factor a quadratic equation. You either know how to do it and it's trivial, or you don't know how to do it and it's inconceivable. What happened to me was a series of channelings, although I hate that word. It's so obnoxious. I prefer maybe the word psychosis. Anyway, a series of self-amplifying revelations springing from an interior source that appeared to my best judgment not to be me. Right? And it was an unusual example of this sort of thing, although I do not immerse myself. I have never read a word of what Seth has to say or any of that. But I gather these things are largely urging people, they're moral teachings is what they are, urging people to straighten themselves out and fly right and care for the earth and be aware and be decent. And the thing which I received was more in the character of an unraveling of a mystery, somewhat analogous, if any of you are familiar with Robert Graves' book, The White Goddess, where in a series of continuing revelations he gained great insight into early Celtic and Goidelic poetic alphabets and encryption methods. The object of my experience was the I Ching. And I noticed, discovered a number of things about the I Ching which led me to the conclusion that what we possess in the King Wen sequence is in fact a fragment, an archaeological chunk of a piece of broken cosmic machinery. I concentrated entirely on the I Ching as a prehistorical artifact. I unburdened myself completely of the necessity to be a sinologist by concentrating on the I Ching as it existed in the pre-Han period, that is before 400 BC, 200 BC. All the commentaries on the I Ching, all the exegesis is Han or post-Han. So I didn't deal with that at all. I dealt with what's called the King Wen sequence. How many of you are well familiar with the I Ching? Good. The rest of you, good luck. The King Wen sequence is the oldest, if you give up Atlantis, Lemuria, etc., the oldest ordered human abstraction. It is, we find fragments of it on shoulder bones that are 4,000 to 5,000 years old. So it's a human-generated abstraction that has been preserved through the millennia. Now, the question is it an ordered sequence? And this was the first koan that the interior voice posed to me. What is the order of the King Wen sequence? As you know, the King Wen sequence begins with the creative, and which is all solid lines. Then the receptive, which is all broken lines. And then whatever it is. I noticed immediately that it was obviously organized in pairs. In other words, each hexagram, the subsequent hexagram can be generated by turning the first one upside down. That's all that's happening. Now, there are 8 cases where turning a hexagram upside down affects no change in it. In those 8 cases, a second rule has been applied, which is, if turning the hexagram upside down causes no change, then all lines change. You meet the first exception in the first 2 hexagrams. Clearly, when you invert the creative, 6 solid lines, you obtain the creative again. Therefore, all lines change, and you get the receptive. So then that solved a problem of partial ordering. That showed that we were dealing not with 64 hexagrams, but with 32 pairs of hexagrams. And the next question was, what is the order of the 32 pairs? Now this is a deeper question and not so easily solved, but it was easily solved for this interior voice that had my attention. It said, look at the first order of difference. Now this is a very fancy way of saying, look at how many lines change as you move from one hexagram to the next. Obviously, as you move from the first hexagram to the second, 6 lines change. As you move from the second to the third, I forget how many it is, 4, I believe, and so on, so that you can make a linear graph of the first order of difference as you move through the King-Wen sequence. And I rushed out and bought graph paper and did this and looked at it. And it's a sawtooth. All of these figures, by the way, are in the book, The Invisible Landscape. It's a double challenge to give this lecture without visual aids, let me tell you. But as you all are probably expert visualizers, why, you should have no problem here. So when you graph the first order of difference in this way, an anomaly just jumps out at you. This is clearly not a random stochastic process that you're graphing. If it were a stochastic process, you would expect the possible values, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to occur in more or less similar proportions. However, you notice immediately there are no values of 5. There are no first order of different changes in the King-Wen sequence of 5. Now, what is the prohibition against 5 about? I don't know, but it's worldwide and Neolithic. Astragali are the knuckle bones of sheep that have been used since the late Neolithic into Roman times to gamble with by burning dots into the knuckle bones. And in fact, playing dice is called throwing the knuckle bones. There are no Neolithic astragali with 5 dots burned into them. It's a number which is just strictly avoided. So there is some curious thing going on with the number 5.